Now before we jump into making my #1 requested video, how I make my Sunday sauce, we first have to get started prepping the tomatoes. Now literally yesterday, I just got finished serving my Sunday supper pop-up in New York City, and I got an extra number 10 can of my favorite tomatoes, Bianco di Napoli, and these are just 6-pound large restaurant service cans. And for a Sunday sauce, we need lots of sauce because it's gonna cook over hours and hours, and there's gonna be lots of meats cooked in it. So it's going to reduce and get absorbed by the meats over time. So we want to have way more sauce than we actually need to. We can always save and freeze extra sauce. If you don't have enough sauce, that's no good. I'm just gonna run it through my food mill because you know I like my tomato sauce pureed, like a passata. Just run all the tomatoes through the food mill, get every last bit of pulp out of there. And then we want to clean out that can with some water. Then you want to add that water straight to the sauce to compensate for all of that evaporation that's going to happen as it cooks. And you got a nice little decorative flower pot. You don't have to throw it out. So we have our sauce pureed. All we're gonna add to it is garlic, basil stem, and some olive oil. And then we're gonna start to incorporate our meats. Now at this point, some people would like to get a big pot, sear the meats first, then get the sauce in. But I like to start the sauce first, get that up to temperature, get that cooking, and that gives us time to prep the meats that need to go into the sauce immediately, that cook the longest, like the short rib. That's gonna take maybe 4 or 5 hours. So we wanna make sure we get the sauce cooking and the short ribs in as soon as we can if we wanna serve it at a reasonable hour in the evening. I usually will cook this in a nice tall, like stock pot, but I just got this new big pan. This is called a rondo. This is a 10-quart rondo. These are more sort of popular in restaurant kitchens when you do food service, but at home, if you can find one, it's really great because you have the benefits of a wide cooking surface area, so you can reduce things faster. And you can also fit more things without sort of risking damaging stuff as you stir it, and maybe tearing the meats. So I like a wider vessel than a taller vessel for something like this, but you can obviously use whatever you have. But we'll talk about the pans in a little bit. Now, if you've followed this show, you've seen me make my weekday sauce several times. So you kind of know the rundown. We're just sauteing that basil stem and the garlic in that oil, infusing the oil, and then we're adding pureed tomatoes just at a larger scale. But what really sets this apart from weekday sauce is how long we're gonna cook it. Weekday sauce is a fresh sauce, it's bright. Sunday sauce is a deep, rich sauce that cooks for hours and hours. And it's also flavored by meats rather than only the olive oil, basil, and garlic. Just get it on the stove and bring it up to temp while we prepare the meats. Now let's take a second to talk about the meats. Typically, I like to choose 3. There's a variety of meats that you could choose to cook in and flavor this sauce and serve with your Sunday sauce or Sunday supper. My grandma served meatballs, hot Italian sausages, and pork rib. But growing up, she never really cooked the pork ribs all the way through till tender. They were always a little bit tough, so I never liked them. I've got the pork here, I've got some beef with the meatballs, and instead of the pork ribs, I like to use short ribs. Probably more available now than it was back in the day, and it's just more in my palate, and it adds amazing flavor to the tomato sauce. And then I've got ground chuck, 80-20, and also ground veal, half and half. Veal is an incredible thing to add to meatballs if you can find it. If not, I designed my meatball recipe to be just ground beef because it's most widely available. But any of my meatball recipes, you can always just split the meats up with like pork, veal, and beef, lamb and beef, whatever you want. So it's sort of the same technique. And then of course we've got our sausages. And they all cook in different times. Short ribs take the longest. Sausages, we want to cook till like kind of fork tender till that casing breaks down. And then the meatballs cook the shortest. So we start the short ribs first. Before we jump into searing the short rib, we've got to talk about the pans we're going to use today thanks to our sponsor today, Made-In. Made-In partners with multi-generational factories and artisans to offer a comprehensive collection of pots, pans, serveware, and everything else you might need to cook and serve food in a home kitchen. This is Made-In stainless steel clad collection, which are crafted here in America and Italy and are used by some of the world's best kitchens. They're 5-ply stainless steel materials, which sets it apart from other pans out there. It allows for superior heat retention, even heating, and ease of heat control. It comes in an 8-inch, a 10-inch, a 12-inch, and I also got the 3-quart saucier and the 10-quart rondo. One thing about the pans I weigh heavily is the handle. The Made-In handle is designed to stay cool on the stovetop and is ergonomic to help balance the pan. Gives you a sturdy grip no matter what you're doing. Sometimes with round handles, you get a little bit of wiggle waggle, and it can be dangerous. Made-In is so confident in their quality that it's backed by a lifetime warranty. Thanks to this show, I've had an opportunity to try lots of pots and pans from different brands, and every made-in product that I have is one of the best pans that I've ever used. And you better believe I'm not gonna talk about Made-in without saving you money. So today, Made-in is offering my viewers 15% off their first purchase with the link down in the description. So go check out Made-in down below, and now let's get back into the recipe. So the first meat up is the short ribs. We just wanna get a pan on medium-high heat. We wanna season up those short ribs on all sides. I'm using bone-in English cut short ribs, but you can use boneless short ribs. These are actually probably a little big. We used much smaller ones at our Sunday supper pop-up, so they cooked a lot faster. So you wanna keep that in mind. You wanna cook them smaller, they're gonna take shorter amount of time to cook. The larger they are, they're gonna take a longer time to cook. You're gonna have to factor that in and make adjustments to the recipe if that's the case. So you just wanna get them all into the pan with some olive oil and sear them fairly hard. We want a really nice crust developed on all sides of the beef. So just take your time, be patient. You don't have to do it on super high heat. You can do it on a nice moderate heat and allow that crust to develop slowly. And once they're all browned beautifully, you want to transfer them directly into the tomato sauce. Then you want to drain that excess fat from the pan, add a splash of white wine to deglaze the pan, and then add that deglazed liquid straight to the tomato sauce. And while that sauce cooks, you just want to make sure that you are stirring it occasionally so that none of the tomato sauce sticks to the bottom of the pan. If it ever gets too thick, you want to add a little bit more water. You don't want it to become too thick too quickly. You want to make sure you keep it on a nice low simmer. Keep that temperature low. You don't want it bubbling too hard or else you might scorch those tomatoes. But can we take a time out real quick? Now I want to make a little change to what you're seeing on screen right now. You see, yesterday I just wrapped up my second Sunday supper in New York City, so my mind was focused on how we prepped Sunday supper for 100 people, whereas when I prep it for the home, you would make it slightly different. We cooked each meat separately, whereas at home I cooked them all together. So it's a game of timing on cooking each meat properly. And the hardest one to cook, because it takes the longest, is short rib. We also specifically cut the short ribs smaller so that they would cook a lot faster than the ones I used today. And what you're seeing right now is me cooking the short ribs uncovered, but I would suggest to you that you cook them covered for this first 4 to 5 hour period. You really want to get them most of the way tender, and once they're at that point, then you can start to cook the sausages and the meatballs. I probably could have cooked the short ribs a little bit longer, but I was impatient. Be a little bit more patient than I was, and make sure those short ribs are well on their way to tender before you get started with the sausages and the meatballs. Those changes will be amended in the recipe that's going to be linked down in the description, so just refer down to the recipe. So now your short ribs have been cooking for about 4 to 5 hours covered, right? And they're well on their way to being nice and tender. So now we can start to cook the sausages, and we're just gonna sear them like we did the short ribs on all sides until they're really nicely browned. And then once they're the color that we like, we can get them into the sauce. We can drain that pan of any excess fat. Then we can deglaze that pan with some white wine or some water if you don't have wine, and then get that into the pot of sauce. Then we're gonna cook those sausages for about an hour, and then we can add the meatballs. Now while the sausages are in now, we can get started making our meatball mix. And of course you could do this ahead of time if you want, but I find it's a nice time to do it. So what we want to do is take our ground veal and ground beef. Then I'm going in with 2 eggs. And just mix it in together with your fingertips. Try and break up the meat. Try and get that egg coating every little piece of ground beef. I add the egg to the meat directly because it's a fixed amount of egg I want to use, where the other ingredients have a variability. Set this off to the side. Then we need to make a little bit of whipped ricotta for the meatballs and the garnish afterwards. So I'm going to take 2 cups of ricotta with 2 tablespoons of olive oil and some sea salt, and I'm going to take an immersion blender and just whiz that till it's nice and creamy. Then I'm going to take about a half cup of it and add it to a bowl. Then we're going in with some tomato sauce, some pecorino romano cheese, some grated garlic, some breadcrumbs, some chopped parsley, salt, black pepper, and then we're gonna give it a mix. The exact amount of ingredients for a large batch of these meatballs is gonna be linked in the recipe down below. We wanna stir that up well and then add that to the meat mixture. And we're gonna stir that up to our hands. And just judging by it, I can tell that it's a little bit too loose. So I'm just gonna work in a little bit more pecorino cheese and a little bit more breadcrumbs until I can roll a ball and feel confident that that ball's gonna hold its shape and not sort of sag and become some sort of irregularly round shape. And once they hold a nice ball, we can scoop them into about 2.5 to 3 ounce balls, roll them up, and then they're ready to get cooked. So now these are ready. Got 30 more minutes on the clock. We're just gonna let these chill, and after 30 minutes, we're gonna fry them and get them in the sauce, and then we're almost done. They do call it Sunday sauce because it basically takes all day to make. So we're gonna take the rest of that whipped ricotta, we're gonna put it into a piping bag or a Ziploc bag if you have, and we're gonna get ready for that garnish. Then we're gonna pick a bunch of basil leaves and get them ready to be fried crispy. By now the sauce has been cooking for about 6 to 7 hours. Good time to be able to add the meatballs. So let's get that pan back on the stove, and we're gonna fill up with a good amount of olive oil, and then once it's hot, we're gonna add that basil, and then we're gonna deep fry that basil till it's nice and crispy. And a good way to tell it's done is when it starts to turn a glassy forest green color, and as soon as you see that, get it out of the oil as fast as possible. Don't let it get any darker than that. Then add the meatballs in, and we're just gonna sear the meatballs on all sides. You wanna get a really nice browning, just like we got on the sausages and the short ribs. And once the meatballs are nicely browned, get those into the sauce. Now we can cook these meatballs for a minimum of 30 minutes. Now while we wait for the meats to finish cooking, it's a good time to take some bread and munch on that sauce and check the consistency. It's a really nice thickness. I want to kind of maintain it here. So I'm going to use water a little bit at a time to maintain that consistency and to ensure that I don't over reduce the sauce. Short ribs are hanging in there. They got a little bit more to go. And once the short ribs start to like kind of fall apart when you mess with them and the strands start to lace the sauce, it's a good indication that the sauce is just about done. We can get some salt into a pot of boiling water and start to cook the pasta. I got some mezze rigatoni that cooks in about 12 minutes, so I'm going to set a timer for 10 and then finish it in the sauce for the final 2 minutes. Now in case my sauce over reduces, I'm going to save some of that pasta water off to the side, and then once 10 minutes is up, I'm going to drain the pasta, get this nice saucier onto the stove, which is a beautiful pan to finish pasta in. I'm going to get some of that sauce into the pan on medium heat and then get the pasta in. And then just sort of meld that sauce with the pasta for that last 2 minutes, finishing cooking the pasta through. The pasta's absorbing that sauce. That sauce should really cling to the pasta. And once it's really nice and al dente, let's get it plated. Now I'm serving this for one, so I got this nice little kind of personal, quote unquote, family style bowl. So I'm just gonna spoon this pasta into the bowl, nice mound, and then a nice amount of sauce on top. We're gonna plate the meats up in a separate bowl, the sausages, the meatballs, and the short rib, a little bit of sauce on top of that, and then we can take that whipped ricotta and we just want to pipe these little dollops all throughout. As I go and fork in the pastas, you get little bits of ricotta all throughout. And we're going to give the same treatment to the meats. Then Parmesan cheese, then that crumpled up basil. And what you've got yourself is a traditional Sunday supper that would make any grandma proud, just a bit modernized. You've got to try meatballs with veal. Now that we've made meatballs enough times and you know that a basic beef meatball is good enough, if you do find veal, that is primo. I mean, look at this short rib. Now, Sunday supper is very personal, and this is how I like mine. And I think it's a meal that would make my grandma proud. So if you want to taste a piece of my home, the recipe for this is going to be down in the description. Go check out Made In if you want to get some pans. That rondo is my new favorite thing to cook with. If you haven't checked out my last video documenting the first Sunday supper pop-up I made in New York City, I recommend you giving it a watch. It's a different type of content from me, but you might like it. That's all that I have today. I'll see you next time. Until then, take care of yourself and go feed yourself. Now, if you liked this video, you're really gonna like this video I just posted. It's a different type of video for me. I hosted a Sunday supper in New York City. It's a 30-minute video, but it might be the best one I ever made, so I think it's worth a shot if you have the time. So that video will be up on the screen right now. Otherwise, thanks for watching.